Hi everyone and welcome to the FCA podcast. This is a place where we dive into stories, insights and experiences from our vibrant franchise community. We chat with franchisors, franchisees, service providers and our valued partners to bring you the latest and greatest in the world of franchising. Today we're excited to be joined by one of our platinum partners, ER Strategies. They've been a fantastic sponsor of the FCA for many years, helping our members navigate the complex world of employment compliance. And with us today is Damien Gooden, the Group CEO.
Thank you, Helen. Thank you for having me.
Excellent.
Excited to be
Thanks
here.
for coming in. So, Damien, let's start with the basics.
Sure.
Can you give the listeners a bit of background on ER Strategies and what's your primary focus?
Great question. Well, ER Strategies has been around for nearly a quarter of a century, looking after franchises for the most part, but also other businesses. Navigating the HR landscape in this country is tricky, particularly if you're running casualised workforces. There's 122 different awards, and there's many other instruments that people are employed under that are negotiated separate to that. So if you don't know what you're doing, you can get it wrong. And we make it our business to make sure that people are supported in franchise networks, not only the franchisor to make sure that they're doing the right thing, but also that the communications that go out to the franchisees is strong and the education is strong. And the importance of these things is really clear. And then, supporting the franchisees' employees in some cases as well, so that if they've got a question or a query, that we can be a sounding board for them to say, look, this happened, not sure what the story is, and then we can help guide them to how that might be addressed. So franchisors, franchisees and franchisees employees, the whole network, we're looking after at all levels.
Excellent. Well, that's an all-round answer. Thank you very much.
Welcome.
So before we go into more about ER Strategies, you've been a long-term, as I said, standing platinum partner of the FCA.
Yep.
So why was partnering with the FCA important to your business?
Well, it's a very clear leader in a community of franchise people. So we've got some great franchising clients that we've had for a long time, and we love maintaining those relationships and we're very grateful to have them. But we also want to get out and meet more franchise groups and try and spread the good word about not only using us, obviously that would be ideal, but doing the right things important for the sector. So at least if we can educate people to say these are things that you should be aware of. I mean, there's been enough press, everyone should be aware, but to get out there and continue to put those things forward is really important. And what it allows us to do in the FCA is get to a lot of franchise groups in one go. So we can go to events in states, we can go to events that are national, and we can collect a whole bunch of different franchise groups or connect with a whole bunch of different franchise groups at once, but also other suppliers as well, to find out what the challenges they're solving, and if we can sort of align or bunch up with them and say, well, you can do this part, we'll do this part, and we can actually give like a franchise-wide solution with a few different partners to make life easier for franchisors.
Sure.
There's a lot to do.
Yep.
Being a franchisor is hard. There's a lot of compliance. HRIR is one element, but there's so many more things that need to be taken care of. And using our partnership with the FCA to spread the good word, I think people are more coming around to the fact that they have to do something.
Yes.
You can't do nothing.
Yep.
Whether they use us or not is up to them, but doing something is really important.
Sure. Yep. And and very, very welcome here at the FCA. So I'm just thinking now of challenges.
Yep.
ER Strategies offers our FCA members free employment compliance advice.
We do.
So what's some of the most common compliance challenges that franchise businesses face? What are you hearing?
Oh, Helen, there's so many. I think probably the most common is franchisors not having an acute awareness of what their award requires them to do.
Yeah.
So generally speaking, an award will have wages, but it also have other allowances and potentially other entitlements. Some of these awards are very tricky, very detailed, particularly if you've got a casualised workforce, if you're in hospitality, restaurants, those sorts of things, different hours of the day, different rates of pay. So those things can be really tricky. And they are probably the number one, those things around that would be the number one group, I guess, of questions. Off the back of that, we get a lot of questions for how do I know my franchisees are doing the right thing? so from franchisors. And really there's a few different ways, but the Vulnerable Workers Act suggests that being proactive with getting out and auditing a percentage of those is probably a good way to do that. And that's a service that we offer. But some people do that internally as well, and there are various other different ways. Some franchisors have taken over the payroll of their franchisees to make sure that they can manage it. So things around pay are very, I guess, because of the media probably, but also people want to do the right thing. People want to make sure the fundamentals in their business are good. They've got good people in their franchise partner group who are treating the good people that are their franchisees' employees well, who are treating their end customer well. So looking after the baseline fundamentals are really important.
And you mentioned there was 122 awards. All thrown into one.
Exactly.
So you just spoke about being proactive,
yes,
rather than reactive with compliance. So can you elaborate on why that's crucial for franchise businesses?
Well, it's funny when people call and say, "Oh my goodness, this has happened. Help us." we are limited by what we can do. We are limited by what they have done as to what we can do. So you can't roll back and say, well, where you've taken a misstep in your process, for example, we can't fix that for you retrospectively. All we can do is acknowledge that it was there and try and minimise the impact going forward.
Yep.
If someone comes to us as they first start putting their franchise together or growing their franchise, or as they get the number of franchises up a bit and say, hey, we don't have a program to make sure that we're compliant across the group, what do we put in place? We can actually set them up for a better chance at success. And part of that's education, part of that is expectation setting. So as much as there's the legal side, and the Vulnerable Workers Act, I bang on about it all the time, but it's very clear. There's also the fundamental thing of if you don't tell people what you expect of them, it's very difficult for them to meet your expectations. So we work with franchisors to help educate their franchisees about their expectations. And we make sure that the franchisors know what the government's expectations are of them. And it's all about making sure that expectation flows all the way through. Because if everyone knows what to expect, people don't get surprised and people don't get disappointed. So that's really good. So if you've been proactive and you've got those things in place, it's usually a small issue that can be rectified quickly and you move on. Sometimes if you don't have things in place, it can become a bigger issue. Maybe it's left over a long period of time. Say, for example, an underpayment. If you identify an underpayment, in the month where someone's underpaid, you make a small change to your system to make sure that underpayment doesn't happen anymore. Yeah. Thing one, tick. Then you rectify the underpayment, so make that small payment of that month shortfall. Thing two, problem solved. If you have an underpayment today and you don't find out about it until 2029, even if it's only 5 cents an hour, if someone works a lot of hours in 5 years, that becomes a big issue. And then if you've got multiple people, so you multiply the time by the people, the mistake by the time by the people, it becomes a big issue. Yep. So being proactive and jumping on the front foot, best way to minimise risk. Sure.
Okay, so in order to help people with that, you obviously provide a range of resources and tools.
Yep.
So can you give us an overview of these? Like how are you helping businesses?
Yeah, I guess where we're looking after franchise groups, we're directly focusing on the legislation and what we believe the reasonable steps would be if the government said you've done the wrong thing or a mistake's happened. Right. Now, the reasonable steps talk about education. They talk about auditing, so proactively going out into your franchise partners and checking to make sure they're doing the right thing. Yep. Are you providing them with resources? So templates of contracts, templates of policies, those sorts of things. What about franchisees, employees? How do they raise something with you? Are you providing them with a way to raise an issue? So, for example, if you're my franchisee and I'm working for you and I feel like you've underpaid me and you say, no, I haven't, but I still feel like you have, what's my next step? Now, we believe best practice suggests that the franchisor should have a mechanism for all those employees of the franchisees to contact them to then arbitrate or sit in the middle between the franchisee's employee and the franchisee to check to make sure.
Sure. Yep.
And we provide that service as well. But really it's also the legislation, and then it's fit for purpose depending on what the franchise group has. Some franchisors have huge head offices with many resources, HR, IR departments and heads of people and culture and all those sorts of things, and they do a lot of that stuff in-house, and that's cool. Other franchise groups even big names, and I remember when I started working in franchising, thinking about these ads that you see that you think they're massive companies. There's lots of stores, but they're all little businesses, and the franchisor's not necessarily a big business either, and they may not have anyone in HR. So it might be we're working with the finance person, or we're working with the legal counsel, or we're working with the CEO to fill that HR/IR sort of piece. So then we tailor what we do based on the complexity, but also the skill set that's within the franchisor. So we just fill the gaps.
Yep.
Yep.
Great. Excellent. So looking into the future, in your experience, what changes in the compliance landscape should franchise businesses be aware of in 2024 now and beyond?
Yeah, great question. Well, I think the immediate future is actually going to be impacted mostly by some legislation that's happened recently. I think that the changes around sexual harassment and the way that that's now viewed by the government as something that you need to be proactively taking a stance on as a business. Similar to the way that safety is, work safety, if you need to be proactively looking after safety, and if an incident occurs, you will be heavily judged on what safety mechanisms you had in place and what processes and how well you followed those. The similar sort of level, I guess, of detail that businesses are going to need to go into for their sexual harassment, to be able to say that we proactively educated people, we made sure everyone knew what the expectations were, and we educated people so that if something does happen, that they can go back and say, well, we did all these things. Because if they haven't done all those things, there's going to be some huge ramifications. And I see in the short term, that's going to be a real area of someone's going to go down, I think, and be made an example of. And there's certain industries where these sorts of things happen more, particularly if you've got alcohol around, where people change a bit, that they're at risk. I feel like that's in our future. But the biggest one of all is the psychosocial safety. And, again, I was focused on safety, but all the toolbox talks in the old days about don't cut your thumb off, don't drive a forklift if you've been drinking, that sort of stuff. Now it's about mental health and people's safety and people's ability to feel like they are cared for, that they don't have too much of a workload. And there's a number of different factors now that need to be taken into consideration for every human that you have in your business.
Yeah, sure.
So what you might think is fine, I might think is unbearable from a workload point of view, for example. From even a joke, right? Someone tells a joke, you hear it and you think it's hilarious. I hear it and I think that's disgusting or it's offensive or whatever, and the impact that that's having. And I fear that again, in a similar way to the sexual harassment, that there'll be a few examples or a few cases where businesses are shown that they are not doing enough, and then they'll be made example of. And then what will happen is the pendulum will swing for all the businesses around going, oh my goodness, we have to do something about this. How do we do this? We need to do it now. So I would recommend all businesses, if you haven't got something in place on those two particular policies, sexual harassment and psychosocial safety, if you're not actively educating and setting expectation in your group, in your franchise group, with your franchise partners, with them, with their teams, I would recommend you do something about that in the short term.
Sure.
Yeah,
very important. Good points. So let's share some examples then. Can you share a story or an example of how ER Strategies helped an FCA member overcome a significant compliance challenge?
Yeah, look, I won't name any names because we are working behind the scenes to solve problems that people would hope would never happen. I think one that springs right to mind is technology use. So there's some great systems out there that do time and attendance and tracking of hours and figuring out what rates people should be paid based on what hours they worked, what hours of the day, how many hours in a day, week, etc. But if those systems aren't configured correctly, what spits out at the end is not correct either. And again, fortunately, we were in a position where we were doing proactive audits. So even though these systems are in place to try and make sure it's right, we're also double checking for the franchisor. The franchisor realised that one of the franchisees who had multiple sites was not looking after people who were working at both sites in the right way, and they were being underpaid. So for them, it's like this is it's sort of an admin issue in that we thought it was right, but we haven't taken into account the hours they're working across both sites. we've actually underpaid this person because they've worked more than they should have. So how do we make sure that that's rectified and again, fix the problem at the admin point of view so it doesn't happen anymore, and then rectify the underpayment, the shortfall, and fix that person up and make sure that everyone's aware, hey, this is what happened, this is what we found, we fixed it, and it's not going to happen again, and move on. So, and fortunately we did, because if that, again, like I said before, if that happens for 3 months, it's still might
it's
be
fixable.
Yeah, but if it's 5 years, that payment that you have to make back, that shortfall, can be a huge number.
Yeah. And so can the consequences as well. Yeah.
Indeed. Yeah.
Okay. All right. Well, let's have a look at some tips that you can give us, for those of our members that are new and emerging, and they want to strengthen their compliance. What's some, top 3 tips for them?
The first tip I would say is stay informed. That's number one. Ignorance is not a defence, and not doing anything is not acceptable. So it's just not possible. The FCA's our strategies hotline is there, the 1300 number. Call it. If you've got a question, call it. Also, sign up to our newsletter or someone's newsletter so that you're getting notified when things change. Because particularly in the last 18 months, and we've been running this business for a long time, it's changed more in the last 18 months than it has in history.
Yeah.
So there's lots of changes, and they might be small, but some of them are really important. Like, think about about 12 months ago, the idea of the family and domestic violence leave switching from being something that was unpaid to now paid, and everyone is entitled to that, no matter how they are employed, casual, part-time, full-time. How you treat that within your business, and specifically if you put it on someone's pay slip, you're not allowed to put it on there as family domestic violence leave, for example, because hypothetically, if someone who's in a situation where they have a controlling partner at home who sees that, and then that might cause extra issues, right? So that's part of the protection of the person who's taking the leave, who obviously needs protection because they have to take the leave. That sort of small thing can make a huge impact, not just on your business, but on that person's life.
Yeah.
Right? And there's so many examples of that now where we just have to make sure we're doing it so right.
Okay. So
number one, stay informed. Stay informed.
Yep.
Yeah, absolutely. Number 2 is, if you don't have a resource in your franchisor who is a HR, IR person, get some support. And again, I'd love it for it to be us, but it doesn't have to be.
Yep.
And it doesn't have to cost thousands and thousands, millions of dollars. It needs to be at a level that is consummate with what your resources are at head office.
Yep.
So the Vulnerable Workers Act talks about the expectation of a sophisticated, large head office business versus a small, unsophisticated franchisor. They don't have the same expectations, which is reasonable. Same as a small business doesn't have the same expectations as a big business. But have some support, because being proactive, as we spoke about, is going to save a lot in the long run.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Right.
And number 3 is, when in doubt, think about the person. And I reckon in business and in employment, in HR and IR, the number 1 test that I like to run is the pub test, but you're not allowed to drink anymore. So the cafe test, right? So let's say, for example, Helen, let's say I get fired, right? And you're my mate, and we go and meet for a coffee. And there's 2 scenarios. The first scenario is I come in and I go, hey, Helen, I got fired today. And you go, oh, Damien, I'm so sorry. What happened? You go, I don't know. I went to work today. 9 o'clock, the boss called me into the office, gave me a thing, said I'm fired. You go, well, that's pretty shit. Like, that's not very good form. On the other hand, I'm underperforming as an employee. I'm coming in late. I'm not doing my job properly. I'm not hitting my targets. The last 3 months, my boss has been telling me, you're not meeting your targets, you're not meeting your targets. If you don't keep meeting your targets, we might have to take some action. We might even have to fire you, right? So let's say that happens, and we sit down and I go, hey, Helen, I got fired today. And you go, oh, yeah, what happened? I go, well, the boss has been banging on about me about not reaching my targets for the last 3 months, and he told me if I didn't reach them, I was going to fire me. And I didn't reach them, so I got fired. And you go, well, that sort of sounds pretty reasonable. Yeah. So that sort of test, run that through your mind about what would, if the person that you're taking an action on, whether it's a colleague or an employee, a team member, if the reaction of their friend or their or their partner or their parent, depending on who it is, would be sort of seems like, even though I'm backing you in because you're my mate, it sort of seems pretty reasonable, as opposed to that is unreasonable.
Unreasonable, yeah.
Think about that before you take your action. If you're not going to consult someone who knows and you're not going to do all that stuff and you're not informed, at least try to use that pub test or the cafe test as a guide to best practice.
Nice one. So 3 tips: stay informed, get support, and think about the person.
Yep. Very
like
much
it.
so.
Love it. For FCA members that are interested in connecting with ER strategies or utilising your free advice, what's the best way to get in touch with them? Your number is?
Well, the 1300 number, 1300 108 486.
Yep, 1300 108 486.
And it's on the FCA's website, of course, and if you are interacting with anyone from the FCA team, it's on their email footer. So I would do that. Otherwise, you can Google ER strategies, will come up, and you can call that number. Just let us know that you're an FCA member, and we'll just navigate that and we'll give you the same services if you'd called that number.
Sure.
Yeah, that's the best way, because oftentimes, particularly the preliminary engagement, we need to get a bit of background. So when people email in and go, hey, I need some help with this, it's going to be a phone call anyway, probably, because we need to get a lot of background to get to the point where we're informed enough to make a good decision about what to do.
Great. So any final words of advice or encouragement to those in the franchise sector to navigate the compliance world?
Well, follow the tips is one, but also don't be afraid to not know. I think sometimes people bluff or they sort of shy away because they don't know. But it's okay. You can't be an expert in everything. And the franchise model is built around small business owners who are becoming part of a franchise group because that franchise group offers them a whole lot of support around things that they don't necessarily have either an interest in or they're not really great at. Partners can be the same as that in your franchise. So don't shy away from the fact that you don't know something. Lean into it and put your hand up and say, I'm not an expert in this, but I'm here trying to find out or trying to do as best I can.
Great advice. So, Damien, thank you so much for coming in today.
Pleasure.
I appreciate the time that you took and look forward to, not getting lots of phone calls, but at least getting people to ask for support.
Yeah, and it's
from
okay.
ER strategies.
Yeah, it's okay to just ring and ask for some. It doesn't have to be advice. It can be education. If you don't want to engage with us, it's okay, but we can point you to resources or give you some resources to get you started.
Yeah.
And for everyone out there, I don't think there's anyone that doesn't know Damien from over the years. But if you don't ring and say hello, by judging by what he's just said today, you can see that he's across everything that he needs to be as far as workplace compliance goes. It's a very important part of our franchise businesses.
Importantly too, Helen, there's far smarter people than me that are in our team. So please call. Lots of smart people.
Excellent. Thanks, Damien. Thanks very much.
Thank you, Helen.